Hey, it's TDA and welcome back to this Dyson Sphere Masterclass. Last time around we built some yellow science and now it's really tempting to use these ILSs and start scaling up to huge city blocks of production. But if you do that, I can promise you, you're going to run into a lot of bottlenecks. So what we're going to do today is actually kind of consolidate what we already have. And most importantly, we're going to set up an actual mall, which this is not really much of a mall. We're going to expand on this a lot, and in order to do that we actually also need to add in quite a few new resources that were not automated in terms of production just yet. And if we've done all of that, then we're ready to scale up to the end game. We're also going to deal with our defenses a little bit, but just settle in and enjoy the ride, I would say. So we've reached the point where we definitely want to start scaling things up at least a little bit, and that means it's now time to really start expanding our mall. I've been calling this a mall, but of course this isn't a mall of any decent size because we're only producing a couple of things, so let's go and fix that. And that is where this blueprint comes in. This is something that a lot of you will be familiar with if you watched any of my previous playthroughs, but it's actually a streamlined version of what I've been showing you before. So what are we doing over here? Let's first check, is this thing actually working? Yes, it is. Okay. What are we doing over here? We're producing all the early game buildings in a single build. That's a lot more efficient than making a build like this for every single building, because most of these buildings are actually all using the same type of materials. So over here in the start, what I'm doing, I'm actually bringing in the basic resources like iron, concrete, coils, circuit boards, and gears. And in the bottom, I'm doing the same thing, but then for the steel as well as the glass. And with those 5-6 materials, you can actually make pretty much everything from the early game. So we're making miners, we're making smelters, assemblers, power towers. Over here, we're going to be making, once the assembling machines show up, there we go. We're making some of the logistics related things like the splitters and the boxes. We're making pumps. Now, in order to make pumps, we actually need to make the gears, the engines as well. These are not engines, these are motors, sorry. Motors, we're making the motors as well, but you can make those from the same materials that we have in the belt over here. We're also actually making turrets, not entirely sure if you still need them at this point. I've included the traffic monitor. I rarely ever use them, but a lot of you do use it, so it's in the blueprint. And then on the bottom row here, we have everything related to oil, mostly, and science. We're going to need some of these plasma exciters for that, but we can actually make them from glass and the magnetic coils, so we're doing that on the in the build itself as well over here, so we can make sure we always have some refineries and extractors coming in. New in the build are actually the large storage units, because you can use them for the putting them on top of the battlefield analysis base. And then what I actually took out is the sorters, the belts, and the foundations, because we're making all of that in the starting build that we made a couple of episodes ago over here, so we no longer need to make them in this basic build. This will take a little moment to get started. Make sure you grab some of these bots that we've been producing. Make sure that you keep spreading your processors between the different builds so you get a little bit of everything rather than a lot of one thing. And then all you need to do is make sure that there's actually logistics bots in here. It seems most of them have been filled, not all of them. Make sure you press this arrow when you make a blueprint for yourself, so it will automatically populate the buildings with the bots if you have them in your inventory. And as you can see, most of them already had it, so there's a lot of bots flying in now. Putting the stuff on the belt, and then slowly we will start producing everything. Now, again, make sure you set some limits on your depots, because you don't need 1,000 of these smelters just now. Just a couple of stacks might even be enough, so you can even limit this even further, depending on what you want. The problem with a build like this is always that the first few assemblers that require, let's say, circuit boards will draw them off the belt, so anything that needs circuit boards later on won't actually get it until you have enough supply or these earlier assemblers are completely done. Just leave it do its thing. You should have enough resources to find a little bit of everything in your boxes pretty soon for now. As you can see, we already have a couple of things showing up, so like power poles and things like that. You can just pick them up or request them from your inventory now. So if I say, okay, I want at least 200 power poles now, the bots will start flying in and delivering them to my inventory. So super handy. So as our science is slowly ticking away and we are progressing through the research tree, and we have the mall over there doing its thing, I actually I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to be building next. There is a lot of resources on the right-hand side of my base, and I want to keep things as neat as possible, just because I like the looks of a neat base. But this is really inconvenient, because we actually do want to use most of these resources. We have a lot of open space over here that is actually, other than the fact that we need to clear out some of that water, is very convenient to build in. If it wasn't for the fact that that's exactly on the route for the Dark Fox. So what I actually want to do is move my defensive line a little closer to these bases so we can actually utilize this space, and we might actually be able to grab the oil as well in that case. Okay, so step 1, clear out the water. This is a nice little desert now. And then just relocate your defensive line to a different position by simply going to the Ctrl-C, selecting the defensive line that you already have, don't fix what isn't broken, and Ctrl-V and just place it wherever you want to go. It's a very easy way to just relocate an entire setup. Now, of course, we are going to need some power, so what I'm thinking is maybe just use these turbines as a power line. Might as well get some extra power out of that, and as soon as this power charges up and is connected to the rest of my builds, then this will actually allow the battlefield analysis base to speed up the actual production line. Now, as you can see, I didn't actually have enough turrets, so I can either grab them from my mall now, or I can just delete the defensive line I already have. I actually like to leave these things intact for a little while, because there's a lot of resources in there, and then just build them. Now, you do need to make sure you're done building this before you get the next wave, so let me focus on that for a moment. Now, I've actually gotten a couple of questions of people saying, how are you still alive with this defensive line? It's not enough. Well, let me show you. This is a 180 unit wave, so the maximum wave you can get. As you can see, some of these signal towers are under heavy attack, but it's no problem. And then actually it's a lot harder to defend yourself as you get closer to the enemy base, because the enemies are less spread out. If you're on the other side of the planet, they will kind of come in a long line usually, so it's easier to defend. I did do one thing though. I actually increased the number of rocket launchers a little bit, missile turrets I should say. Not by that much. I think I increased the number by like 6 or 7, 8, something like that. But it's a slightly larger number, but that's the only thing that I did in terms of improving my defense. The most important thing with your defense is making sure you have enough power. If you don't have power working at 100% efficiency, you can add as many turrets as you want, but they're not actually going to be adding any efficiency, because, well, a turret firing at 80% only does 80% of the damage that a turret functioning at what 100% would do. Same line of reasoning applies to any of your factories, and there's no point in expanding your factory if you don't have the power to actually make sure it's functioning. Now, look at all that nice building space we have cleared out for ourselves over here, and I'm going to put a lot of that to use in this episode. Specifically, something that I've been mentioning in the last few episodes is that we're not actually making plasma exciters, and we're actually also not making a couple of other things that we need for the building. So if you check out what we can produce at the moment, we've been using geothermals. Those actually need photocombiners. We're not making those. We also need the supermagnetic rings, which we're not producing. We are also lacking some silicon-based things like the crystal silicon that we need for the accumulators. What else are we missing? We are not really producing too much silicon in general, so that's probably a point of attention. And we need the plasma exciter for a lot of things, like, for example, also the laser turrets. So photon combiners, silicon-based stuff, plasma exciters, and then last but not least, but that's probably a separate build, we also need the supermagnetic rings. So it's building time, and I'm going to be aiming at producing 2 photon combiners and 2 plasma exciters per second. That's probably more than we need, but it turns out that that aligns really nicely with the rest of the math, so might as well overbuild slightly and put that to use later as well. As you can see, we need 6 of the Mark II assemblers in order to make that. I will be switching to Mark II assemblers from now on exclusively, because we don't want to be using the old stuff anymore. And of course, we're still working with Mark II builds. Now, in order to make photon combiners, we're going to need prisms and circuit boards. And in order to make plasma exciters, we actually also need the prisms, but we also need the magnetic coils. So there you see all the stuff we need on our belts elsewhere. So let's add in the actual prisms. Now we actually need 8 of these assemblers making prisms, so what I like doing is bringing in the glass from somewhere and then making 2 lines of assemblers making that. And then we have a single outgoing belt that will be drawn from both sides, and that goes down here. Now remember, the plasma exciters also need the prisms, and this is an exact distance of 3 away, so I should be able to connect a sorter like this. You do need to do this with Mark III sorters, otherwise the speed is going to be too low because of the large distance that we're transporting stuff, but it will work just fine like it is. Okay, so that means we have glass, circuit boards, and coils to worry about. And we need a lot of glass, actually. We need a total of 24 smelters making glass because of the prisms. They require a whole lot of glass, as you can see. We actually need 1.5 prisms, glass per second per assembler, so that's a whole lot of glass that we need to make. So there's 2 incoming belts with stone over here, and then we have 2 outgoing belts like this, and 24 smelters making the glass. Now the nice thing about having 24 smelters is because each of these smelters takes 1 stone per second, it's actually a total of 2 full belts of incoming stone. So that's really nice. We're fully utilizing the belts, and we're just fully utilizing all of these smelters over here as well. Then next on the list are the coils and the circuit boards. We actually don't need that many circuit boards, only a single assembler will do, but we do need 4 of them making coils. That means we're going to need to bring in magnets from somewhere. We're also going to need to bring in some copper that is going to be used by both the circuit boards as well as the coils. And of course we have the outgoing belt for the coils over here, so nothing too much new here. What I also like about all of these builds that we've been making so far is that this clearly shows you that you don't need to rush to Mark III belts. There's not really any point to Mark III belts until you actually exceed the input capacity of a Mark II belt, and that only happens when you really start scaling things up. So feel free to keep using the Mark II belts for a very long time. And as number 6 was the magic number in one of the previous episodes, the number 12 is going to be the magic number this time around, because as you can see, we need exactly 12 smelters making magnets, and they fit in very nicely with the ones we already have. So there it is. Now we still need to bring in the iron and the copper. And I love it when a plan comes together, because as you can see, this very nicely fits into the rest of the setup, almost making it entirely square. We do have a little bit of open space here that you could use to put in an ILS, for example, and just export this if you're building this on a different planet for some reason. But as you can see, we need a total of 5 copper smelters and 2 iron smelters, and they fit nicely into the open space we have left on the left-hand side of our assembler rows. We have an input belt or 2 coming in, and we have an output belt as well. We have the iron on the top here, so the one with the copper can go extended like this, and it's all nicely flowing through our entire build. Now I'm actually moving away from using the intermediary boxes everywhere to catch up in case this ever backs up, because, well, otherwise this build just doesn't look as good. That's the main reason, honestly. If you want, you can just move everything a little bit to the side and add a couple of boxes in here to catch any overflowing materials that you might want to be using elsewhere in your builds. Remember, the point of these boxes is mostly to be used by your mall, and I don't think that anything that we're producing in here is really in demand so much that we need to focus on that additionally on top of what we already have. So that's the reason I'm not putting in the boxes as well. There's no point in adding boxes for stuff that you don't need, but there's definitely a reason to put in boxes for stuff that you do need, and we do need a lot of silicon. Now, technically, you could make a separate build for silicon, because, well, it's not related to anything else we're doing in here for the plasma exciters and the photo combiners. But, well, it makes sense to kind of all build this together because we're focusing on upgrading our mall. So that means we're going to add in, yes, you guessed it, 12 smelters making silicon, and then we're going to add a couple of them making crystal silicon. Skipping ahead a little bit to the completed build, where I added in all the power towers, all the sorters and things like that, as well as an ILS to request all the materials that we need, which is the 4 of these. As you can see, I added in 4 smelters making crystal silicon. That's plenty. That's actually, again, going to be producing exactly 2 per second. So that means we have 2 photo combiners per second, 2 plasma exciters per second, 2 crystal silicon per second, and I think we have a leftover of 4 silicon per second. That is actually going to go in this box because we do need that in our mall, and that's all there is to it. Now, the reason I'm requesting 4 resources and I'm leaving open this extra space is actually really convenient as well, because this will allow us to put in the war parcel later on, so we can start requesting these items from anywhere in the entire galaxy. So that's just very convenient. For now, we're doing most of the work through the logistics drones that I've been slowly spreading across my existing ILSs, as well as this one. As you can see, I probably want to add in the rest of the 100 we can fit in here, because right now we're not adding in enough resources. And I also need to add in a couple of vessels to make sure we're actually getting the silicon from the other planet. Now, assuming that you have your drones and your vessels in place and you've let this running for a while, you should have plenty of processors at this point. And at that point, you might as well just start automating the distribution of the processors. Just grab a couple of thousand processors that you've produced in the meanwhile, put them in the things where you really need them to go, and then let things take care of themselves for a long while. This will just make sure you have a bit of a stockpile of everything, and at that point, you can just let the AI figure out what is in demand the most, and then fill up the stockpiles of that by itself. And honestly, if you don't use blueprints non-stop, because if you just plop down all of these blueprints and you're done building everything in a few seconds, your production will need a little while to catch up. So that's the downside of using blueprints. Sometimes you can kind of go too fast, but that's where manual reallocation comes in if you need it still. But if you are playing and building things by yourself, you should have plenty of time to let things take care of themselves now. Now we have a lot of new items in production. It's time to start automating our mall a little further. So I want to start making the wireless power towers, which aren't useful by themselves. So I'm splitting them off, similar to what we've done with the ILSs previously. But we also need those in order to make signal towers, which we can now because we have crystal silicon in production. It will take a moment for the drones to collect everything, but that should take care of itself now. On top of that, we also added in a couple of other defensive things like missile turrets and battlefield analysis bases. So whatever we need in order to resupply our defensive line over here, as you can see, my signal towers are struggling a little bit. We can now just completely automate that and have those replaced. So something I've noticed now is that we're actually not bringing in enough steel. We don't need that much steel, but we do need more steel than we're currently producing, because we are using that for the drone production over there. We're using it for the ILS production. We're using it in the base production. And the only place where we're actually, where we're actually producing the steel now is in these 3 smelters in our starting build, which is not really going to cut it. Since we're making the mall expansion miscellaneous type of build here anyway, we might as well add in another line of smelters to make some more iron and steel. Ta-da! It looks super nice and tidy over here. We're producing about 1 steel per second now, which is not super much, but it's going to be... It doesn't sound like much, but it is actually more than sufficient to supply our need. And we're actually also producing a little bit more iron than we need, so we have a little bit of surplus going into the box over there as well. Now don't worry, I've added this into the blueprint, so if you're downloading the blueprint and you want to use it by yourself, then it will be the complete build that you see over here. So far, we've been kind of just automating stuff that we had already been doing manually, but now we're trying to really start pushing the progress again. So I have this rather large build to make solar panels. Now you might be wondering why so many? Well, mostly because at some point you might want to utilize solar panels in very large amounts to make rings around your planets and things like that. It's a really efficient way of making power, infinite power on your planets. In order to do that, you're going to need a lot of solar panels. So this is why I have 6 of them making solar panels over here. There's actually some room left over here in case you want to proliferate these as well. That won't actually increase the amount that you produce, but it will increase the speed at which you produce them, so that you can really churn out a lot of solar panels in a very short time, assuming you have enough resources. However, probably more interesting is the addition of the laser turrets over here with a small build. That again includes the plasma exciters and the photon combiners, so that's why we wanted to use them, as well as the steel that we just added, so more steel, yes. Because we want to start switching away from using ammo-based defenses to more infinite defenses like lasers, because they only require energy. So the basic idea is very simple. I'm going to take out these turrets, replace them with laser turrets. However, if you do that, make sure you don't do it just before a wave, and also make sure that you have plenty of excess power to support those laser turrets, because again, otherwise they're not going to work. Because if I would replace them right now, well, things are probably not going to work out like I want them to. Okay, power and laser turrets are in place. Let's find out if this works. I think it should. This extractor, by the way, is taken out, but this should be fine as long as I'm taking out the other units quickly enough. They tend to leave alone your production facilities as long as you have turrets and signal towers in the way. Well, that wave went out really, really fast. It barely damaged the signal tower, so this is where you can really see the power of laser turrets over the earlier version of the turrets. Because I know I'm going to get questions if I don't answer this right away, I actually added in a line of normal turrets in the back, mostly because I had them. We're producing the ammo anyway, and it looks kind of cool. But this, you really don't have to do this. This does serve some function though, because sometimes for some reason there's a couple of those flying units that will just kind of fly over and aim for something in the back. There's no turrets here whatsoever, so this is just to kind of catch those stray units in case they try to fly over. It doesn't happen that often. I'm not entirely sure what triggers it either. I think it's actually the fact that the turrets are all the way in the back. They sometimes tend to aggro some of the units that are still at the base, and they will just zoom over, and if enough of them get through, they can cause a bit of damage in your base. So this is just to have a bit of an additional defensive line, and because it looks fun, but you don't really need to do this. The turrets by themselves, the laser turrets I should say, along with the missile turrets, should be able to take out pretty much anything the enemy throws at you. Now in this stage of the game, and really at any stage of the game, but this stage in particular, you do need to really watch your in and outputs, because there's no reason, no point in expanding if you're not bringing in enough raw resources. For example, over here you can see I'm really struggling in bringing enough stone here. So that means that I'm just going to add in a couple of PLSs on this planet, or maybe an ILS on the other planet, that actually brings in stone and has some more vessels and drones. You can see I completely filled them up now, but still my stone is struggling. There's no point in expanding until I have the production facilities that I already have in place completely optimal in terms of their functioning. You will also find that you're probably going to be spending some time in flying to the other planet again to crush any popping up bases that I just did. For example, over here, there was just another relay station forming a new base. You get notified of impending attacks on different planets while you're not on them, so that's really convenient. However, you will only notice this when the attack is already nearly coming in. Typically, that's not a problem. The first few waves are very, very small. So assuming you have a couple of these signal towers anywhere near your actual facilities, that should take care of itself. If they land anywhere close to an existing signal tower, they will automatically start attacking it anyway. But that might not always be the case, so just keep an eye on that. The only issue with this that I have is that the two planets that I have tend to be on opposite sides of our star system, which is really inconvenient, but yeah, that's just the way it is. There's no way around that. One thing that you might want to do when you visit another planet and take out a couple of bases there is, well, just set up a few mining stations. I like just going there, and every time I go back to a different planet, set up at least one additional mining stations. It feels a little bit less like a chore. You don't have to put down 5 or 10 of them all at the same time, and you're still expanding your resource inputs a little bit further. In this case, you're just bringing in a lot of extra iron and titanium. Those are the things that you need the most, along with silicon. But honestly, just pick up whatever you find close and just bring it in, because there's no such thing as having too much resources. Something to watch out for when you're placing your defenses closer to the enemy base is that sometimes you might get these non-stop attacks that I have right now. So you can see there's these units coming in, and then there's new units coming in straight away. These are not actually part of the waves that you can see showing up right now. As a show of a proof that these defenses are actually capable of handling just anything. Those were 360 units flying at my base at the same time. No problem. But what I was trying to say is, if you get these non-stop attacks, that's actually a problem, because this will actually drive up the threat of the Dark Fog Hive a lot, which I don't want. It's an easy way to farm a lot of materials from the Dark Fog, but that's not really what we're trying to do here. So what I'm actually going to do... oh, that was a signal tower taking out really quickly there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do some housekeeping. And what I mean by housekeeping is basically blasting the dark fog of the planet where I don't want them to be, and that's where this particular destroyer blueprint comes in. It's really simple. It's just an ILS requesting, well, not those. We actually want to request the missiles, and then putting those missiles in a lot of rocket launchers. This is a temporary build. This is not going to be here forever, but basically what I want to do is take out this base over here. And with those extra missile turrets, it becomes really easy to clear out any base that you want. Now, I'm actually going to leave in the other 2 bases because I don't mind getting attacked by the Dark Fog. I just don't want the interplanetary attacks until I'm willing to deal with them. We could have been ready to deal with them for a very long time already. It's just not what I was aiming to do at that time. But you could also just decide to clear out the entire bases of the Dark Fog altogether and not have to deal with them anymore, other than the fact that you will get some new attacks coming in probably. It's completely up to you. Make sure that you only leave up bases that you actually are willing and prepared to deal with. There's nothing wrong with just taking out the Dark Fog altogether. The main reason I leave them intact is because it's a really easy way to farm some soil pile, which is a very annoying thing to deal with otherwise. And of course, remember that we are getting in quite a lot of resources, so you might be finding some use for those as well. However, today we are focusing on the mall, and in order to complete our mall, at least in this stage of the game, there is one item that we need that is needed for a lot of different things. For example, we really want to switch over to the Mark III belts, which requires the supermagnetic rings. Those are also needed for the new sorter, so the pile sorter, which is awesome, by the way. Again, we need the supermagnetic rings. We also need those for a couple of other things, for example, implosion cannons if you want to use those. And let's see, we also need them for the planetary shield generator, which is quite important. Once we actually start to expand into space, the enemy will not like that and will get attacked from outer space, so making sure we have enough of these generators going is probably really important. There's a couple of ways you could actually go about this. The quick and dirty way would be to just copy the turbine build that we already have, and then just add the missing components to that. Because if you look at the recipe, you need turbines, you need magnets, and you need graphite. And magnets and graphite, of course, are extremely simple to make, so that's a very easy and quick way to make the turbines. And, well, there's nothing wrong with that. 2 turbines per second is what that build produces, and that means you're going to get 1 magnetic ring per second out of that. Quick and easy. However, what I want to do is make a nice clean build that takes advantage of the new Mark II assemblers that we have, and as it turns out, that's a really nice clean build, exactly like I wanted to. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through this build a little quicker than in the previous one, because a lot of this we already did, but we're starting out again with the 12 smelters making iron, and then we need 4 assemblers making the gears. Now, just to remember, we're switching from the Mark I to the Mark II, which means that for every 4 assemblers that we had before, you could pretty much take 1 out, and that's the only math you need to do when you're converting a build from Mark I assemblers to Mark II assemblers. So instead of 4 machines on Mark I, you need 3 machines at Mark II, and that produces the exact same amount. Applying the same logic to the magnetic coils, we only need 4 of those now. We still need the 12 smelters making magnets, and we need 4 smelters making copper. And as you can see, I did the layout slightly different than I've done it before, and you'll see why in a second. However, that takes us to the 3 outputs that we need in order to make the motors. Applying the same math to the motor production assemblers, you can see we only need 8 of those, which is nicely in terms of symmetry with the 8 that we have on top here. So we have a total of 16 assemblers now making stuff. The belt for the coils is going around here, all the way around, so we can draw in from both sides, and then the other 2 inputs are going to go in the middle. Remember, you never want to have 3 inputs in between buildings where you need all 3 of them, because you won't be able to connect your sorters to all of them, so that's a problem. And then we have the outgoing belt. We have an outgoing belt on top here that's going to tie in with the outgoing belt on the bottom, and then we have everything going into the turbines over here, and then the turbines go out here. Now, I just noticed that this belt is the wrong way around. If you hadn't noticed this, because this is a not super new addition, but it's relatively new if you haven't played for a while, you can now just flip your belts with 1 push of a button. So that's really convenient if you build it the wrong way around, like I just did. Then I only need to add in 3 assemblers for the actual magnetic rings, and remember, you do need to do the math. And are you guys ready for the cleanest build ever? Well, I am. Let's do it. Ta-da! We added in exactly the 8 smelters for the magnets that we need for the rings, and then we have 2 more that we need for the graphite. There's only 2, and these are perfectly aligned with the remaining room that we have for the smelters in between here. And look at how nice and square this build is. I don't know about you, I just love it when a build is exactly square or rectangular, whatever you want to call it. That just makes it so easy to fit it in with anything else, and there's no wasted space or anything like that. At least no significant wasted space in any way. The belts are all nice and clean. Yeah, as you can notice, I'm really liking this build. And this is what it looks like when it's humming along. I don't know about you guys, it's just awesome. Now, don't forget to remove the battle stations because, well, that's not really needed at this point anymore. And if you want to make things look clean, I would recommend that you align your ILSs exactly with each other so they're always exactly at the same distance from each other in terms of the actual build. So as you can see, I'm aligning all these production facilities with each other, and then these ILSs are in the exact same distance as well. That's also the reason why I not always include my ILSs in the builds, especially if it's builds that you might want to include somewhere else. You can always just take them out, of course, when you're building them if you need to kind of make these belts smaller or longer. But that's something to consider when you're making your own builds. Anyway, that means we now have magnetic rings, and that means we can add a ton of stuff to our mall. First and foremost, we now have the pile sorters as well as the Mark III belts in production, and these things are all awesome for our late game builds. Another thing that we can start producing now are the accumulators, which are super useful, not just for the actual powering between planets, but also on the planet itself in terms of defense and having those spikes every now and then. We're also going to need these chargers in order to charge a couple of them up, because we're going to need those in a second. And in order to charge them up, of course, we need to build a couple of these chargers, place them down, set them to charge, make sure there's an input belt where we have those things going in. I'm not entirely sure why I'm doing this the old-fashioned way and not just putting a splitter under here and exporting them like that. Sometimes old habits stick. You're not going to need a huge amount of these. This is not the point transferring the power on this planet to anywhere else. If anything, we're going to be low on power on this planet the entire time. We just need to get a few of them to charge. As you can see, we're not actually charging any at the moment because we're hovering just below 100% power. So we're going to need to fix that as well. And for those of you that were paying attention, you might have noticed that I said we are going to need those charged accumulators for something, and what we're going to need them for is the orbital stations, because these actually need, well, the rings. They need some rockets, so we can make those now. We could already make them for a little while. And we are going to need some charged accumulators in order to make those. So there is a thing that you need to watch out for, though, when you start making this build, because this build will require ILS inputs, and as you can see, because this is completely automated, what the game did is it dumped all the ILSs on this belt and is trying to transform all of those into orbital stations. So first of all, in order to populate one gas giant, you need a total of 40 orbital collectors. Now, in order to build those, you are going to need 4 stacks of 10. So this is why I limit this to 10. This basically means that I'm never going to produce more orbital collectors than I need for one single gas giant. At some point in the game, maybe you will need more of that, but for now, 1 is going to be more than enough. Also, you might want to check how many ILSs you actually have in your inventory. As you can see, I currently don't have that many, so I might want to grab a couple of them off this belt just to make sure that I'm not running into issues with all my ILSs being transformed into orbital collectors. That is actually going to take quite a while, so this is also why you want to have this build up and running pretty early on, because even at a normal production speed, these things take forever, 30 seconds, just to build a single one. So do that times 40, and that means that you're going to need about 20 minutes, even at full production, to make the orbital collectors, which is also why I have 2 assemblers, just to speed things up in case we actually have the required materials. Other than that, don't forget that we actually built most of our mall at Mark 1 assemblers, so what you could do is upgrade them to Mark II, of course. Now, this will make sure that whenever you're using some of your buildings, they get replaced as soon as possible. In order to prepare for the next episode, make sure that you scale up your raw resource production on the 2 plants that we have as much as possible, and also make sure you have plenty of power to work with. As you can see, I am now making use of my solar panels. I built a couple of these rings around the planet. There's a gap in my ring because, well, the enemy is in there. But other than that, just a couple of rings around the planet like this is more than sufficient. It doesn't actually take that much time to build them, and each ring will give you about 100 megawatts of power, so that's actually quite plenty. As you can see, I am now way above my 100% threshold, and I'm actually charging quite a few things, specifically the accumulators, so that makes sure that the orbital collectors are now also in production. Also, now is a perfect moment to make sure we finish up on any upgrades that we haven't done so yet. Specifically, all the offensive and defensive things are quite useful as well. If you haven't done so yet, you also want to have the purple signs completed for the next episode as well. You probably have that since I mentioned it last time around as well. And just keep clearing out anything that's on the yellow side of the tree. That's actually going to be most of it, so we're approaching endgame pretty rapidly now, even though it might not feel like it. We're still on the first planet building mostly, but you don't actually need to go through your entire universe in order to complete the game pretty efficiently. Yeah, so make sure you also grab a couple of things like the upgrades for the logistics carriers and the drones, because that will make your life a lot easier. And oh my god, I haven't actually researched vein utilization yet, which is like the best thing in the game. It's also quite expensive, so that's the reason that I skipped it. But if you have some time, make sure you grab a couple of levels of that as well. And there you have it, guys. It might not feel like we've done a lot, but that's actually not completely true. Remember, we expanded our facility with a lot of different materials that we needed for our mall. We actually have a mall now, which is pretty useful as well. And this will make scaling up for the late game super easy and super efficient. While if you do this, if you start scaling up too early, you always run into bottlenecks, and you get into an issue where you're producing a couple of things in huge amounts and other things not at all, and you're basically just spending a lot of time debugging your system. Setting it up like this means that all the resources that we can draw from anywhere in the universe that we produce on this planet are completely dedicated to the little science production we have at the moment, as well as our mall, which means our mall will never suffer from input issues. We also moved, of course, the defense lines, and we did some housekeeping, set up some more defense, and in the next episode we'll start focusing on transitioning to the end game. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.